Hey, you guys ever get so bored that you look at the creepypasta wiki? No? Not realistic enough? Good, that fits my argument, because if that's not forced to you, you're still very unlikely to be one of the few who actually find the story of Clockwork interesting. And you heard me right, Clockwork is what we're talking about today. Now, I know this is going to be a lot like the movie reviews of the movie The Room. It's going to be like Godzilla crushing a crouton with combat boots on, or dropping a gosh damn nuke bomb on top of an anthill. I've got to stop listening to Eminem. But anyways, the point is, I'm studying to be a film director. If you want to learn more about that, go to my buddy Eli's channel and find out how you can make that a reality. And since I'm homeschooled, I have to figure this stuff out for myself. So I'm learning from the outcomes of people with the same passion. Even if those outcomes just so happen to be failure, still bring out your notebook and pencil because you can still learn a thing or two. So let's dissect this, even though the majority of the lessons we can take from this are what not to do. Here we go! So what I did first was look up the Clockwork story on the creepypasta wiki so I can see the full character and story. But when I looked, I found this other story about an actual clock, like a grandfather clock. This was the wrong Clockwork! Turns out I was on the wrong website, then I finally found what I was looking for. Okay, good, I can still go James Marriott on this character. Turns out, the story was put on the wiki and was watered down. It's still close enough to the story that I can still pick it apart and critique it, but I don't think the author made the post on the wiki. But still close enough that I can still work on it. So, to start this off, I'm going to read the origin story, talk to you guys in depth after. I know it's annoying when reaction channels pause the video you're watching so they can explain something, make a joke, blah blah blah. But my comments are going to be less effective if I don't do it here, so sorry, not really. Oh, and Mom, if you're watching this, I'm old enough to know this stuff. Might as well be now than later. I did put a clip of Mel Gibson's Hamlet in there, I guess. Nah, forget it. I'm not going to get grounded. More like chewed out. I've been chewed out before. Anyways, Natalie was once a normal, unassuming girl who came from a broken family. Her nature started to change drastically when her family started verbally and physically abusing her. The age which the abuse began is unknown, aka the authors are too lazy. Although, many may agree that she was first abused when she was very young. You have the slightest idea how little that narrows it down. Natalie was unable to tell anyone at the time. The only true person she felt safe was with her brother Lucas. That was until she was sexually abused by him more than once in a period of 4 years. Her brother?
Thou incestuous, murderous, damned Dane!
Why? During her abuse, she tries to talk to a girl in class about it, but Mia sabotages Natalie and spills her secret, prompting online and in real-life harassment during elementary school years. Oh, and don't worry about Mia, she won't come back later. When Natalie was 16, things take a turn for the worst. Natalie's boyfriend, Chris, asked to talk to him. What, hold on, him? Wait, in the wiki it said him. I didn't even make this a point in the script, I just noticed that. Natalie's boyfriend, Chris, asked to talk to her after classes. He admits to her that he wishes to break up and see other people, citing her macabre and her negative mindset, as well as not telling Chris why she feels so negative, which, all of that except the macabre, is a very valid point. Returns home and goes into bathroom, and with her mindset seemingly more negative than before, after keeping everything bottled up for too long, Natalie had finally snapped inside. She self-harms herself by sewing the corners of her mouth into a smile with black thread and stitches. Her mother finds her doing this and decides to schedule some therapy for her. With a visit to the therapist, Natalie explains that time has been her biggest issue and that she wholly believes that time, and the whole concept of it, was against her, and was the reason that led to her abuse. After trying to get psychological help, she was sent to a doctor for some mental drugs that would hopefully improve her mental state. He says that she'll be back to normal in no time, then slips an anesthesia mask on her to perform surgery. Oh, I'm gonna get back to this part. Things went horribly wrong during the surgery. Natalie regained consciousness and she was able to respond and move about. She then momentarily passes out after coughing up blood for a reason that the authors never specify. She then wakes up again and the doctor from earlier informs her that she was never supposed to wake up during her surgery, and her appearance is also changed from the botched surgery. Natalie looks into the mirror and quickly notices her once hazel eyes have turned to a vibrant green. However, Natalie was surprisingly happy for her new look, and then she went completely insane for no reason. She kills the doctor along with 2 security guards and escapes from the hospital. But aren't the guards going to be like too tough for a 16-year-old girl? Actually, it's going to be super easy, barely an inconvenience. Natalie returns back home through a thunderstorm and kills her mother, father, and lastly her brother. After the murder of her family, she walks into the bathroom and suddenly spots her father's old pocket watch on the rim of the sink. Then she listens to the faint ticking for what seems like an eternity. She disassembles it so only the face of the watch still remained. She repeated what she had told the therapist while removing her left eye and then dropping it into the sink. Then she forces a small clock into her eye socket until it fits perfectly, quote unquote. She then refers to herself as Clockwork. Clockwork walks from her house as it burns to the ground from a fire that she didn't even start, along with her family. She lives on, carrying her insanity with her, leaving so many dead, and saying that she is the one who determines when their time should come to an end. And that's a backstory. Man, I feel like Ben Shapiro after reading the lyrics for WAP.
Wet-ass P-word.
Anyways, let's tackle this first part I want to talk about. It, like most stories, starts off reasonably well. Trauma like this shouldn't be cliched in my opinion, because everything that causes it, it's such a large subject. And to call all of that a cliche is gonna restrict too much from story writers who want to keep realism in their stories. Because trauma is such a real subject, it's used to make someone turn from good to bad without going into too much for story writing. We can't just have someone be like, oh, good guy gone bad. Doesn't work like that. Another use for it is to be used by the authors to set up awareness and handle it with enough care to have people who witness the story sympathize or see the subject shown within a certain light to transcend it for a moment and view it from the perspective that the author wants you to see it in, and hopefully fix it. The problem I have with this part of the story is how it affects the character. Trauma like this exists, yes, but the fact that everything that happened affected her so dramatically is what I have a problem with. Before you say anything though, I want to show an example. Natalie was physically and verbally abused by her family, raped on several occasions by her brother, someone she trusted, was bullied in school and then dumped by her boyfriend. Then there's this other person. You may know this one. This person was named after his father who left him when he was a baby, wrote to him on several occasions and never got a letter back. Physically and verbally abused by his stepdad for years, his dog died because his stepdad stomped it, moved very often, almost 2 or 3 times a year, grew up as an outsider and a white kid in predominantly black neighborhoods, bullied by a kid on several occasions, and even being put into a coma for 10 days by the kid. He was a victim of Munchausen syndrome, introduced to his favorite hobby by his best friend who committed suicide a while later. He didn't even talk for days after his best friend's death and couldn't even bring himself to go to his funeral. He's married and divorced his wife several times, pursued his dream and failed, got fired from his job, attempted suicide, and almost died after overdosing on the equivalent of 4 bags of heroin. It's fair to say that the second person had a more traumatic backstory. But who was he? Ted Bundy? Ed Gein? Some serial killer? Actually, that person is Marshall Bruce Mathers III, Eminem. The Eminem joke from the beginning wasn't without purpose after all. Now, one more bit of context. Let's go through the backstory of an actual serial killer. We're gonna go with Ed Gein. His mother was abusive and very religious. He had to constantly listen to his mother's frantic preaching about sin, lust, and other subjects. He was alone and very isolated with very few friends. When Gein was young, his brother died in an accident. In school, he laughed very randomly. I couldn't find what could have caused this, but the closest thing I was able to find was the pseudo-bulbar effect, or PBA. Gein was moved to a farm, and because of that, was even more isolated. He became obsessed with his mother, and she constantly told him that all women are evil and you should never date them or you'll be in sin. Then he grew up and had to take care of his evil mother, who died in 1945. Now, clearly I'm not a doctor, But with that in mind, how is Eminem's backstory more traumatic than Ed Gein, who became an actual serial killer? One guess I have is the amount of help you're getting. Eminem was able to talk about his issues through music, and even before then he probably wrote in his rhyme book. Those are decent coping strategies. Writing is a good way to cope, and even my friend does that to get it all out. Ed Gein was isolated, he had no friends. His mother would have shut down everything he said, he had no journals, no coping strategies. The only thing that was good for him was his interest in reading about Nazis and cannibals. Now, I make it a point that it's very hard to sympathize with Natalie, because she doesn't try to help herself by opening up or anything. But I'm not sympathizing with Ed Gein. He's still a tangent. He still sucks. Serial killer. Bleh. But we go back to Clockwork. She was given therapy. She had her boyfriend, but she refused to tell her boyfriend what troubled her. She didn't get help because she refused to. If we're supposed to root for this character, stuff like this makes it very hard to do that. Also, another thing that could make her a serial killer is another factor. If we go back to killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, they might play the insanity card in trial, but really it comes off as arrogance, and they're just addicted to having so much power and attention. If we're supposed to believe that Natalie is actually insane, which is what the story states, her backstory is so lackluster that I'm not buying it. After this extremely long tangent, we've almost tackled the abuse part, but then we have this last part, her brother's abuse. The way it's used so passingly and how little it matters to the plot is just indicative of an ignorance and a lack of sensitivity that's very offensive to actual victims. I put a post on Ask Reddit asking any victims if they can give insight on the way rape is used in the story. I got only one comment. It says, "It's annoying and it gets old. Just like people who use mental illnesses as a plot twist, as if we haven't read it a million times." To quote Hoodoo Hoodlums,
"This fucking cliche makes me want to rip the hair off my head. Stories like Play With Me and motherfucking Clockwork, Your Time Is Up, which might I add is possibly the worst thing I've ever read ever, use very shocking subjects like rape, like murder, and handles it abysmally poorly. Okay, in Play With Me, it's very poorly handled, but it at least has some bearing on the plot, as little as it did, but with Clockwork, fucking hell, it's used so passingly that it's flat out insulting to actual victims of rape. It seriously makes me sick to my stomach. If you're gonna add something as serious as rape in your story, you better fucking bring your A game. If you don't know what you're talking about, or if you're just not talented enough, do not go near something as sensitive as rape."
Now, he does talk about the use in murder in stories, which I'll talk about later, but because of how lightly it's used, that trauma isn't being put into any light, and it's just being exploited to add more shock factor into the story, and it's a cheap shot and annoying. It has very little to do with the plot, and it's used carelessly because of its lack of contribution to the watershed part of the story. In these stories, the subject is used like a cheap shot, and it's not good. It's just repulsive. To quote Fish on a Stick, it's taking advantage of the fact that you're a normal person who reacts to things accordingly. Moving on. Natalie was bullied in school. Natalie opens up to a girl named Mia about her abuse who spills the beans and gets the school to harass her. Now, I don't have any evidence to back this up, but as a human being, if a girl opened up about physical and slightly more physical abuse, the whole school wouldn't harass her. And I know for a fact that the people who support her, or at least don't harass her, would vastly outnumber the people who bully her, and that's a fact. Also, when the hammer drop of the story happens, Mia doesn't ever come back, which is really strange and inconsistent. It's kind of underwhelming because she kind of started this whole thing. Now we get to the breakup. Damn it, we're not even halfway through! So when she was 16, her new boyfriend has to talk to her after classes and says that he wants to see other people and break up. Now, breakups are a bad thing. You can put so much love and trust into another person. Once you start dating, you're kind of trapped. You have to keep it up, because if you go back to being friends, it's just awkward. When you break up, you lose your friendships as well. Maybe it was something you did, or the other person. Doesn't matter. You lose all the time that you put into that person, and because of that, it's almost like you lose a part of yourself. I can only imagine the pain that Natalie would have been going through. And it's sad that the writer gave Chris a valid point. So Natalie is again a very hard person to sympathize with. Personally, I find the macabre art not a big deal. It's just a genre of art. But the boyfriend in the story has a very valid point. It's one thing to be negative. It's another thing when you refuse to tell your romantic partner why that is. Whether it's abuse, depression, or other reasons. She didn't do anything. That's what made her annoying. Now, stuff like this makes it hard to root for people, but it has its exceptions. For example, John Kramer from the Saw movies. James A. Janice from his Kill Count videos makes it a point that John's philosophy about the will to live and those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life is effed. But John Kramer is still a badass. Whether it's his gravelly voice, calm demeanor, creative traps, actually good backstory, intelligence, creativity, charisma, his natural Tobin Bell badassness, I don't exactly know. All I know is that John Kramer is fun. Natalie is not. All she has going for her is her backstory that isn't creative, incredibly gruesome. That's it. No personality, no interesting characters, and poor motives. This character isn't just bad because she's dumb. She's also just really boring. And that's what makes it so hard to feel bad for her losing her boyfriend. Another thing to add is the fact that we've never been introduced to what her boyfriend meant to her. If we as an audience were shown, or at least told, about their relationship and what it meant to the protagonist, the breakup would feel far more effective. After all that happens, she goes home and walks into her bathroom, and it says that she finally snaps, even though we're on the second paragraph out of 6. It's like he came up with the story as he was writing it, and didn't even bother to edit it. Editing is important, and grammar is another thing that Hoodoo Hoodlums covers on another video. After another really bad start, it says, after keeping everything bottled up for too long, I already talked about this, it's hard to root for her, it's her fault, blah blah blah. Then the story does the second most forced thing in the whole story. She quote-unquote self-harms by sewing her mouth into an upturned smile. This is a crazy problem, and I'm gonna tackle this one thing at a time. First, to get this out of the way, I get that self-harm is something that's a problem in this world that I unfortunately know quite a bit about. Currently, as I'm recording this, I'm 6 weeks free, and it's a very sensitive subject, so I'll talk about it the best I can. People do it for different reasons. According to Psych2Go, reasons like a distraction from emotional pain, having a sense of control, it feels like a relief, it's self-punishment, and a few others. With all that in mind, no one would do this. No one would sew their mouth into a smile. That doesn't make you feel relief. That makes you feel like a Reaver from Firefly. No one would do that. People might say that they want to, but they don't actually. Anyways, with that uncomfortable subject out of the way, it seems this is just a regular creepypasta MO. From what I can tell, I couldn't find much research about it, but this is called the Glasgow Grin. Characters like the Joker, Jeff the Killer, Kushisaki Onna, aka the Slipmouth Woman, and a bunch of other fictional characters have the Glasgow Grin. It seems that the author was just pandering, and I don't like it. Now, after all that, her mom catches her doing that, and then finally turns into a not abusive but helpful mother. Again, with the inconsistency, it ruins the story. Anyways, when she was sent to therapy, the doctor gives her quote-unquote mental drugs. I just love that. Generic, the medicine. Extra generic meds. Imagine like a medication that's called like pills, all lowercase. Imagine an even more generic medicine called like things to put in your mouth. I'm getting off track. But yeah, it's still dumb. Anyway, still now the doctor... Damn it, my foot fell asleep. The doctor wouldn't prescribe medications this early. And why would they do surgery on her? The only reason that they would do surgery on a brain would be to lobotomize it and remove damaged tissue. So this whole part makes no sense. Another example of the author not giving the audience information is when she coughs up blood for unknown reasons. It's just like saying mental drug. I mean, just explain it. Leaving out the details that we're taking a look in to immerse ourselves in this story, it makes it way less interesting. And on the subject of things not being explained, her eye color! And then after that, then she goes insane. It literally says that she likes her eye color. It's a good thing that happened, and that turns out to be her AZ5 button? Well, call that Amanda Cerny's OnlyFans, because I'm not buying it. After that outrageous sentence, the paragraph ends with her using her Mary Sue powers to kill the doctor and a few guards and break out of the hospital by being a Mary Sue. Oh, and by the way, the phrase Mary Sue, in my personal opinion, isn't used too much. There are a lot of people who explain that this is just used for any competent woman in pop culture, but personally I disagree. Really, there are lots of female characters that even I like. We've got Faith Connors from Mirror's Edge, Claudette from Dead by Daylight, Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs, Princess Leia from Star Wars. Yeah, get f***ed, Ray. Shoshana from Inglourious Bastards, the Bride from Kill Bill, Cindy Prescott from Scream, Gail Weathers from Scream. Okay, we don't actually like her.
Move your fat tub of lard ass now! I'll send you a copy. Do you know what that could do for my book sales?
Aaron from Your Next, Ava from Sahara, Kat from Halo Reach, and many, many more. Shoot, I kind of went on, did I? Anyway, she goes home and Mary sues her family to death. Right here, when I read this the first time, I was thinking, thank God this is over. I hope what little left of the story doesn't have enough room to screw up any further. But what little of the story is left has enough room to screw up even further! Why would you shove a clock in your eye? Why would you do that? You don't even use the self-harm fallback. What is wrong with you, Leaf Crowns? When she walks away and her house burns down with a fire that the story never said she started, she continues her life murdering random people. That's the story.
Now turn on the goddamn light!
But the video isn't done yet. Now, if you know of the Clockwork story and how it's changed, you would realize that I forgot about the time where the writer tried to add a meaning to the story. This was in the original story, not the wiki's watered down version, but this quote was still found on the wiki. She says, "Time makes you live through torture. You slowly progress through life being controlled by society until you come to the conclusion that you have no purpose. It's a vicious cycle. Time does not stop. It does not speed up. It does not slow down. It is violent and makes you live through torture over and over again until you are unable to escape or fast forward away from it." I get what they're going for, but even the statements contradict themselves. To live through torture over and over again, time has to warp. Even though, quote-unquote, time does not stop, it does not speed up, it does not slow down, and it's not a vicious cycle. It seems that the author really tried hard to add meaning that simply wasn't there. He just came up with her "your time is up" catchphrase and simply ran with the idea. And with how carelessly it's handled, it comes off as extremely forced. Another thing about characters is one of the problems with Jeff the Killer's story. The characters are too mean. She's bullied for being abused, her parents are evil, her brother's a fiend, and the rest of the characters are just there to be mean to her and then disappear. Not explained in the least, and that's it. In the wise words of Winston Wolfe,
"Because you are a character doesn't mean that you have character."
Hoodoo Hoodlums also talks about violence in stories, saying that murder can't be used too much, and what he says is agreeable to a point. You can't just go all Eli Roth on random stories and expect them to be all that in a bag of Cheetos. Damn, I love those things. But you also can't stay away from them entirely. It's not just the fact that even Disney movies sometimes use death in their stories. By that, meaning that just because other stories do that, you can. It's not just that. It's also the fact that we've seen movies like John Wick, we're rooting for Keanu Reeves to gun down the enemy. We listen to music like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Bohemian Rhapsody, Pumped Up Kicks, and Framed. We expose ourselves to these really violent parts of pop culture and it's become the norm. The point is, we're pretty much desensitized to it. And another thing, it makes us curious. And we can see that in the stories told of Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, which, by the way, why are we giving serial killers such badass names? I mean, they're the bad guys. Imagine how upset the Zodiac Killer would be if he found out he was dubbed something like Lord Micropenis II. Anyways, the curiosity also does stuff like help us learn to defend ourselves from these bad people or take a look into the mind of these maniacs. The story never explains the goings-on of the events in the story. She just gets super strength. She just gets glowing eyes. She just kills guards. In Ari Aster's movie Hereditary, we have supernatural powers that cause levitation and other crazy things. That supernatural power comes from King Payman in the story. Without these things, the story becomes forced and exhausting. Another thing about this story is it's a creepypasta. Something to ask yourself is, what's a creepypasta? According to Wikipedia, creepypastas are horror-related legends that have been copied and pasted around the internet. In my personal opinion, this story, in a way, is still horror because of the macabre and dark content that causes you to be disgusted and shocked. Though the use of incestuous abuse is a cheap shot, it is still horror, but that doesn't make it good. Now, this story is very loosely related to horror, but I'd say that this is more of a revenge fantasy rather than horror. The audience knows this, so it comes off as less of actual horror, instead just a cheap shot at it. I want to read creepypastas so I can feel emotions like fear, and this feels like a big waste of my time for not having the creepy in creepypasta. As I said earlier, this wasn't the original story of Clockwork. You can find the actual story on the Trollpasta's website. I read a little bit of it, and it is by far more despicable and disgusting than what I've shared. Thankfully, the author spares the details of Lucas's deed, but it's still very awkward and disgusting. Clockwork, according to the website, apparently has a theme song. The song, excuse my pronunciation, Shizuku Painyaku, and the song was made by Susumu Haraisawa. What some people may not know is that the song is actually called Parade. It was for a film called Paprika, released in 2006. I searched long and hard and I couldn't find the meaning of the song, but this one comment on the video states that it's about the destructiveness of capitalism. Now, you may think that this has nothing to do with Clockwork, and that's because it has absolutely nothing to do with Clockwork. The author must have just heard the chaotic sound of the song and simply looked the lyrics up on Google Translate, which is already unreliable garbage, and saw the part about old tires, blood, and meat, and just rolled with it. Honestly, Leaf Crown, you should have just stuck with the autopilot off song and just called it a day. So what did we learn? First of all, giving the audience information, but don't just tell the audience through the narration. Give them hints and let them figure out the story's element for themselves. Try not to use narration, it's just a cheap shot. Second, don't write about stuff that you know absolutely nothing about. And yes, I'm bringing up the Lucas incident. 3. Give your characters character. That means not using characters just to be mean and that's it. Sure, the Joker movie has those misogynistic Wall Street guys, but they affected the entire story. I'd even say that they were the hammer drop in the story. In Laughing Jack, another bad creepypasta, there is this one dog who shows up just to be killed. Don't do that. And also, because it's a puppy, just don't do that. Number 4. Don't rip off Jeff the Killer. He's already one of the worst creepypastas ever, if not the worst. And the last thing is to use the heartache and trauma set up to transcend the trauma for a moment and view it in a perspective that shows people how evil this life really is, and to help us, if not heal, finally notice this and give it attention. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video essay. This honestly took ages, but it was all really fun. And I'm really glad with how it turned out. Please like and subscribe for really no reason other than unlocking the bell icon, but still click the bell icon below so you never miss a new, most likely useless video. Who knows? I might make another video essay sometime soon. Meh. Later.